Good morning, everyone. This is Mike Betancourt. Welcome to the joint meeting of the Winchester Select Board and the Winchester Planning Board on June 22nd, 2020. I think we'll open at least the Select Board portion and kind of move on from there. We're here primarily to discuss the RFP for the Waterfield lot, and I see we've got a few people here and that can kind of chime in, Barry and Francis, who have been working with us on this. We'll wait a couple minutes to see who else jumps on, but otherwise we'll get started maybe at 8:33. I think we'll wait for Heather too, if she can jump on.
Hey, Mike, this is.
Hi, Diab. I can't quite hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
I don't see the little red record button on. Is this being recorded, or is my screen just not showing it?
I guess it's not yet, but
Okay.
I think Brian is the master of ceremonies here, so certainly I think he can hit record. It's not through my Zoom, so record button for me is not working.
Okay, cool. I just upgraded the
There we
client.
go. We're official. We're on the record.
Oh, well, that's funny.
Yep.
Okay, now I see it. Yeah, I got the new client for my machine and everything was different. So
great. So I think we'll get going then. It looks like or I don't know who else is on.
We don't have a quorum yet. It looks like we just have Diab and Maureen at the moment.
Okay. We'll wait.
Yeah.
Brian, thanks for having the share screen all set up.
Sure, no problem. I kind of forgot for a second that I was hosting, so I signed on at 8:30, and then I'm like, oh, I guess I should be letting people in. So I didn't realize that it was my my host.
Mike, are there any votes that we need to take as a board before the planning board is here? I thought there were a couple of things on our agenda.
While we're waiting, I'll just take this opportunity to say good morning to everybody and thank you to everyone who's participating in this joint meeting.
Good morning. And yes, I'm glad to see that Brian has this, all the visuals up. That's very helpful.
Maureen or Diab, I'm assuming you guys expect Heather Von Mering to be joining?
Yes, I spoke with her Saturday, and we actually met for the first time in person outside our polling space. So I think she was planning on coming. Do we know if Lisa will be showing up this morning?
I don't expect her to, but
okay.
Mariana, to your question, I think we only thing I see is the outdoor dining application for three. Was there something else that you saw?
No, that was it. But I figured we can take a vote since our
Yep.
meeting is open while we wait for the planning board.
Yep, sure. Just wanted to make sure with a lot of emails I didn't miss anything else. So for the select board, our meeting is open. I'll take a motion to approve the La Patisserie application for outdoor dining. If everyone has seen it or has any questions for the board or for staff on it, we can take those up as well.
I don't have any questions.
Okay.
Yep, I'm good with it.
Okay.
I don't have any questions either, so
Okay. So I move that we approve the application from the patisserie for outdoor dining as presented.
second,
All in favor, I'll take a roll call vote. Jackie,
yes.
Mariano,
Yes.
Amy,
Yes.
Susan,
Yes.
and yes for me. The motion carries unanimously 5-0. Thanks. We'll just wait, I guess, a couple more minutes, see if Heather jumps on. Unless, Francis, I don't know if you want to just kind of start with a little bit of background of where we are, just because I think Heather is pretty familiar with, the RFP and what's happening, and maybe when she jumps in, then we can get a little bit more to our substantive conversation, if that's okay with the planning board. I just know our board has kind of a finite amount of time.
Maybe we should, Mike, I don't think we need another presentation like that. I think, I don't want to leave Heather out, but I guess maybe we have to get started.
So I just texted Heather. I haven't heard back, but just to let you know, I have texted her. So
Thanks, Brian. I was just going to ask if anybody's heard from her. Thanks.
Or let
Hi,
me-
can you hear me okay?
We can, but I think we really don't need much of a presentation. We've all read the documents. I think we understand where we are.
I'm fine waiting. I'm fine starting. I am here all day. So just let me know what you will want to do.
Thanks for.
Has anyone tried to reach Heather Hannon?
I'll text her as well. I don't know if she has a work conflict. She didn't respond, but I will text her as well.
I have a question that I suspect other people know the answer to, and I just have forgotten. How many applicants came through the RFQ process and who are likely to be applying? How many are we going to be evaluating?
I believe it's 8.
8. Okay. Thank you.
And I think there were 9 total that came through.
So I'm sitting here with a whole lot of documents, and that might be relevant and interesting as just information for the select board, because this is a process where a lot of documents come into play. The ones that I have sitting with me that are closest include the zoning bylaw, and the other is the and Brian may want to be bringing it up. It's called Regulations Governing Section 7.3, Center Business District. So those are the ones that carry the greatest legal weight, and those are the ones that we want to consider in terms of what the process as well as the criteria that would be used in evaluating them. So I don't know how familiar all of you are, except for Jackie. Clearly, I have a feeling some more than others. But as I look at those and see the objectives, they really are going to be they're going to be incredibly important. So I'm reading the RFP exactly. Thank you very much, Brian. And especially this, and I'm wondering how they connect. And I see these general objectives move into the RFP, but the processes in the RFP is not spelled out, which it is legally in the zoning bylaw, and to a lesser extent, the visions that are the regulations connect directly to the zoning bylaw. Maybe is that part clear? Maybe it's not. Maybe Brian, you could just show everybody that so they understand how the reference in the zoning bylaw refers to the regulations under 7.3. What I'm trying to establish is there is a big legal framework here, and I don't think it's all that clear in the RFP. The proponents will understand it. They will, the project, whatever, the developers, they will have lawyers who will try to read this and see how it's going to work. But the RFP doesn't really make it very clear how our process is going to work. So here we go. I'm looking for the part that, okay, that's purpose, that's good. And I'm looking for the part, I'm sorry, I'm struggling with all the documents I've got print right now, that describes the reference to the rules. There we go. So it's, Brian, you could be doing this better than I, but you're helping me. So it's the 7.3.8, pursuant to, okay, the planning board shall adopt rules relative to implement this section 7.3, may include existing building design standards, new construction design standards, submission requirements, and fees. So these two documents work together. And what we're going to be trying to do is see what the objectives are and what the rules are that support the zoning bylaw. So maybe I should stop there. Those are my two big documents, but then I also do have the master plan. And the other thing that I think is really relevant to the planning board, where we've been spending basically every meeting since January at least with development teams for two projects in the CBD. And what we've been getting does not conform to these regulations. So what you write and what the developers submit can be pretty far apart. And I think that's one of our concerns, that we recognize this disconnect, and we're concerned that we want to try to bring that, since this is a town project, we want to bring a project in that actually has more, it aligns more closely with what's already been envisioned through our zoning and through these regulations.
Well, thanks, Maureen. I think some of us have been following, and maybe all of us, either while it was happening or, while we were considering running for select board and reading up on things. We're familiar with the Center Business District rezoning and the process that's the site review process. And so thanks for, highlighting where to find those. And I think, it's hard to know how much detail to put into an RFP and where to just refer to things. And I think this RFP does a pretty good job of referring to things without loading it down. Because as you said, the design professionals are going to know where to look and what to be following. But thanks.
So one of the examples would be under section 2 in the RFP, it's request for proposals. And in the selection process, if you, Susan, say you understand, I'm delighted and it's good. But I think one of the odd parts here is the select board, with the assistance of town staff, will review and evaluate all proposals. That's fine, no objection. But as it goes further down, it's really not clear at all, because it's nowhere present, that if this turns out to need a special permit, which is almost certain, and if this comes in as a special permit project, which is anticipated in the RFP, that nowhere is the planning board called out. And yet what we found with the past how many months since January, that we've gone through multiple meetings with these applicants, and we're still struggling to get them in line in their projects with what's in the zoning and what's in the regulations. They've just come in with buildings that seem total, there's a pretty major disconnect. So we're not even present in the RFP, and yet we're going to have a pretty substantial role, and I think that should be called out. So the RFP serves the developers. It also serves the boards as a kind of it just lays out a process so we're all understanding where we come in and how we come in, and that we come in at an opportune time. And to my mind, we're not present in the way that I think we should be in order for us not to have, I'm going to get it right out there, they have another Winning Farm. The town owned the property at Winning Farm, and then it was handed over to the planning board, and the neighbors organized, the neighbors appealed. It was really a debacle, and it went on for years. So I think the concept here is we really ought to understand who's doing what when. And the earlier the planning board is brought into the process, which we are, and I'm definitely give tons of credit to Mike and the rest of you for coming together as we are. But we really need to be called out here, or at least stated if it's going to be a special permit process, and we need to be involved early on.
Wouldn't you be involved in the special permit process, whether we call it out or not, Maureen?
Well, no, if you're doing your selection process, the way I read this, the select board with assistance of town staff will review and evaluate all the proposals. Let's see, I have to read the whole thing. Evaluation will be based on information provided their submission. Can you see, we're just not there.
But I have a legal concern. If the special permit granting authority is also involved in the selection of the proposals, isn't that a conflict of interest?
I don't think that we saw so we think that the staff really is going to, and Brian, you can correct me on this one, or Francis, is going to make the kind of first round of scoring, and then we move forward with 3 of the applicants, and then get some more substantive feedback from relevant boards and commissions from there. So I think that your concern about it, the liability is a real one. If at the very beginning we start making decisions that are not tethered to the RFP and what's outlined there. So
yeah.
I don't know.
Mike, I thought you were saying, this is sort of an aside. I want to get back to Maureen's point, which was a larger one. But in our last meeting, I thought we were talking about how there wouldn't be a winnowing by staff, that there would be their input, what's favorable, what's not favorable with a proposal, but not a winnowing. But we can talk about that another time. But in any event, to Maureen's point, I believe, and obviously she can articulate this better than I can, that certainly wouldn't want a developer to think there was some sort of waiver of the planning board's role. And I would also note, in addition to the bylaws, there's also extensive regulations in the Central Business District. So even just sort of some reference, even if it's, obviously I don't think at a minimum in a footnote, but it seems like, even some sort of sentence that says, compliance with all relevant town bylaws is presumed, or something along those lines. Or I don't know what exactly you're suggesting.
Well, I think somewhere I want to understand, I would think it would be legal for the planning board to advise on the selection, even participate in the review and offer feedback right at the front, where it's with the assistance of town staff. I think that there should be recommendation from the planning board. Because already with the once we see the responses, we're going to have some sense of what type of architect they hire, for example, what type of scale they have in mind, what's the relationship between parking versus the residential versus any retail. We'll have a lot of information, and I believe the planning board and the town, frankly, because in the end, the planning board's where the action is, that everybody involved would be well served to understand where and when we come in. And if this is a legal question, right now, we certainly should be resolving it before the RFP goes out. I would understand that my impression would be that the planning board certainly could make a recommendation at this stage. But if not there, it should be called out somewhere explicitly when the planning board comes into this process.
Hi, Maureen. This is Frances, and I do think that Brian and Barry and me will look over the legality of it, but the notion is, especially with RFPs, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but the evaluation criteria holds legal weight too. So I believe that was the main reasoning as to why only the select board would be, sort of at the forefront, keeping the score of everything, because you have to disclose the way you evaluated the projects, and the evaluation criteria has to be the one that is used. But the notion was with primarily the staff looking at the evaluation criteria and keeping the score of it, as well as the select board doing it, winnowing that down to 3 or so, because if we get 8, that will be a lot of different proposals. And then we can be clearly in specifying which boards and committees will then provide advice and recommendations for the top, we can say even top 4 proposals that are submitted, and that was how the RFQ process went through. In the RFQ, it was Brian and town engineers looking at the proposals, then meeting with the select board, looking at their scores, and then putting that together to then talk to different folks in town. So we can have the same process and just be more clear here in the selection process which boards and committees will weigh in on the top RFPs.
So Frances, where would you propose placing the planning board in the, you've got this, this document really well. Where, and do you see the advisory board, the main one would be planning board, because if we're going to be special permit granting authority, you wanna, I won't speak to you, Frances. I will speak though for the town. The town of Winchester will be much better served if it's a really clear process now, not where we're all kind of saying, well, it's sort of like we'll be asking you like when. So where do you want to put the planning board, and where do you want to put, to me, design review committee adds a lot of weight, and the other one would be the historical commission. Oh, and it's not just a representative. I want to see the entire boards, all members of each of these boards involved, not the old one representative. So where in this process, and maybe one more I should add, because this was the real, I think, ultimately the real weakness of the Winning Farm project, the abutters, I would say it's legal abutters, because they're the ones under statute always get noticed and invited to hearings. Where do the abutters also come into play?
Yeah, so we already had a meeting with abutters. Unfortunately, not many of them showed up, and I'm sure there are many reasons for that. So we will definitely keep abutters as well as the greater town involved. I think the public insight will be more helpful once we have a series of top 4 developers that can then come and present their proposals and whatnot. And Barry and Brian, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are as to when the planning board should come in, and making that very clear in the document.
Barry,
Sure.
why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I'll jump in for a second. I was going to suggest in the town's redevelopment objectives for the site section, where we talk about the mixed income housing, sustainability and mitigation and design considerations, we did add a sentence at the end there about the, just up below the pictures actually, about the town hiring an external design consultant. So I think we could add some additional language in there about the other boards and committees that would be involved in the review of these proposals after there has been a selection.
So I'm concerned that you're heading in the right direction in that you're saying where this can go. But if you're handing over something that's already done to a permit granting authority, that's not a very good sequence.
But that's the standard sequence, Maureen. I'm a little
I'm not
confused.
convinced of that. Why are you
Well,
saying that?
I mean, I'm a little concerned that we're, the select board has the ultimate authority because they are in control.
No. Town meeting does actually.
Well, okay, I understand that, but in terms of town meeting has the ultimate authority in terms of when the select board presents the final selection. But the select board has the authority to winnow it down. And in the past, historically, I don't see what, if we look at when the ZBA has been involved, if we're talking about special permit granting authorities, let's look at historically. The ZBA doesn't get involved until a permit has actually been applied for. And I am concerned that we are mixing up various phases. And I don't know that we would like the planning board and the DRC and every other board to weigh in on each of the 8 proposals. That will be really unwieldy. So I do believe the planning board has an important role in here. I think that the role starts as the SPGA. It starts when we have proposals or people who are actually going to produce final proposals. And then they come before the board like we've seen in the CBD recently.
And Diab also, I mean, let's not forget that the planning board has been central in moving forward the RFQ and the RFP process. So this isn't a surprise. I mean, we have narrowed it down to 8 developers, and we hope they're going to respond to the RFP. We don't know that they will. I think that there's the potential for us to scare away people if the process looks a little bit too crazy. I mean, it's a small town and it's a small development community, and the board has heard concerns about what's been going on in Converse Place and what's been going on in Main Street. Developers, their goal is to develop, and I feel like our RFP is extremely prescriptive, and we want developers to respond. We want it to be, affordable housing is very clearly what our goal is here, and it has been. So we absolutely 100% will need to hear from the planning board and have your expertise in moving forward and making the kind of final selection. But I don't know what more we can do except whittle down the process to maybe where there's only one person that responds and we kill the whole project. I mean, that's what happens with these things. And frankly, I mean, I think that's what happened the first go around several years ago.
So Mike,
we just know, yeah,
just an answer. I just want to know where, at what point in this document can we expect to see the planning board named as and has the input? At what time in the timeline and where in the document do I want to see it called out somewhere?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, Maureen, about let's keep this simple. And if site plan review is an element of zoning.
No, we're talking about special permit, Susan, which is different.
Okay, but if that's, what is that under? Zoning, right?
They both are, but they're very different.
But they're still.
But they're both under zoning.
Correct,
yes.
Yep.
So maybe we just, and this is another question, which is related. If we could hear a little bit more about the legality or the legal context and role of this RFP. I think we have to disclose to a reasonable, developer what is involved. And maybe we could just talk about in a little more detail what the zoning entails, what the review levels are within zoning. So they're prepared if they are chosen.
I think I'm going to add on to help you, Susan. I see where you're going with it. This is Heather. And my apologies for being late. I had emergency at work this morning. But it's, to add to that, in the RFP, it does not state anywhere that there are design guidelines relating to our zoning,
Mhm.
as far as I can see. So it doesn't note the zoning, that also there's a secondary document for the design guidelines, which, so in the design considerations, that should be in there, in the RFP, which is then also goes to then the 5 on page 12, the zoning and permitting. It says how your expected approach, instead of saying that we expect you to follow the zoning and the design guidelines. And that the planning board is a special permit granting authority. What I think my concern is, and Maureen might be trying to get there, is there's a chance that as we're doing right now with the pre-application meetings, which we've completed for Converse and Main Street, is that if you don't take our feedback at this point, there's a chance you could choose something that will not meet that zoning, and then we're in a different place. So if we don't provide feedback on what you're getting, and if we can see that it can meet the zoning, to give you our general, they're on the right track, but we'll have to work on it, or they're not. You need to know that before you select them. And there's nowhere in here where we are noted as a special permit granting authority. Oh, there it is. So it's in the
Yeah.
it is in the chart. It's just not in the verbiage in the beginning. Thanks, Brian. I'm assuming this is your screen share. So it's not really clearly. I mean, I didn't even find it because I didn't go through and read everything. In terms of everything, so it just needs to be more clearly laid out that the zoning and the design guidelines are part of this, and that the planning board, I don't know how you want to do it, because my concern is we're going to end up in a place where we're going to end up with a developer who can't meet that, and it's not going to go through town meeting if it doesn't meet that. It's just the bottom line of the political component of this, and I want this to go through and be successful, and the best way to do that is to make it very clear that that's where the scale comes in, that's where the design comes in. And there's my concern, and I think it just needs to be much more clearly laid out that is a high thing. Politically, I don't know how the select board could get it through town meeting otherwise. But that's also why I wanted to meet with the select board, because the process of how to get this from here all the way to town meeting is it's a tough process, and it's something that both of our boards have to be on board with and have to get through together. And whether you make the decision and you keep it in your realm, I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure that we know what the ramifications are if we go outside of the zoning.
I just wanted to, yes, sorry, Heather, I didn't know if you were done or not. I just wanted to support the chair's comments as well as Ms. Meister's, because I think, to say the least, what they're driving at is a way to make this whole process more efficient, so that there isn't sort of any, requirement to go back and look at something. So it's just to make this process better. And I won't repeat what's so carefully and mindfully said already, but I completely support what the two planning board members have indicated. Thanks.
I am going to jump in and say the experience I had, because I came in as Winning Farm, had been the town had decided on the direction for development. The direction was something the neighbors vehemently opposed. The planning board had no staff planner. The planning board was just kind of there at the receiving end of this kind of what was already a mess, and with a lot of pushback. And at the end, actually, there were some real zoning questions too, serious ones. I won't repeat now. Anybody who wants the saga, I can tell you. But at the end, it didn't go forward. So even so, we don't want to waste everybody's time. When I want to reiterate what Heather Von Meering said, and I know Dia agrees, we do want a project here. We believe that the project can be developed, but we also have had the experience of the past few months, and I can only state to you the difficulties we've had is not with our board, it's with a developer who basically has disregarded everything that's in our zoning and in these regulations governing the development. So if you're not if you're working with a difficult developer, it's going to be hard. And our board is going to be looking back at these regulations and the zoning and saying, if it doesn't meet our criteria, we don't want it to go forward.
Well,
Hey, Maureen, sorry, this is Francis. The purpose of why we started with an RFQ before going into an RFP, and the purpose of why we've been working closely with the town for the past year has been because we don't want a project with a difficult developer. We want this to be a partnership, which is why we initially wanted to see the qualifications of developers. We wanted to see where they stood, both in terms of design, affordability, prior experience working in similar projects with other towns. And so honestly, from the get-go, you're already entering into a project process where the developers know what it is that the town is leaning towards, and the town knows what exactly the developers, where they're coming from, and their prior experiences. So that was the purpose of doing a two-part process, was to make sure that the select board and the planning board and the different folks working in town know that the developers are good ones. They're not just somebody coming in with a giant 40B telling you that, overriding the zoning. So I think that's really important when we're considering all this, that these are already vetted developers. And really, the majority, like 8 out of 9 of them, are renowned both in Massachusetts and some nationally as being, some of the best developers around for affordable housing. So that's really important to consider. Second, I think that as Dia mentioned, and Marianne also mentioned, the process gets harder the more prescriptive it is from the beginning. We have 8 really good developers. We don't want to put them into a very small box before they've submitted anything. I think that the fact that the different, Brian and different folks working in town will look through this and provide their own recommendations to the select board prior to the select board winnowing it down means that, Brian will catch whether the developments are completely overriding the zoning and whatnot. So we will have the local experts involved from the beginning, so that we make sure that none of the potential developments do not meet and have absolutely no chance of meeting the zoning and design guidelines. And then Barry, you can please tell us how to make this more clear as to when how the planning board and other boards are involved.
Sure, I would suggest that we add something under the design considerations on page 5 under the redevelopment objectives, where we just specify something to the effect of what Heather mentioned in terms of standard review process and who will be involved with that. Just as a reminder, also on page 7, the rule for we talk about the interview process, and the fact it will be led by the select board, but they will be conducted as public meetings with other town boards, commissions, and staff invited to attend and provide input. And we can be more specific there about which boards and committees are involved with that.
So let me just jump in and say right away, you want the planning board there. I don't want it to be a giant public hearing. I want it could be a joint meeting just the way we're having now. I can do it in a half hour. We'll look at them. We'll give you our feedback. If it's a big public meeting, there are too many people. If we're going to be giving meaningful feedback, it's got to be a small group. And then for a list, I hope somebody's taking notes here, that in addition to the planning board, it is desirable, it's in our zoning bylaw once we get into the permitting process, but early on, there is such a thing in our zoning for pre-application meeting. We've just been doing that with these other 2 parcels. So I would say do want recommendations from and they can be done in their own meetings with the design review committee and the historical commission, but they should be the entire group. They can send over, they do it all the time, even for little bump out kitchen things. They can send over a memo on 1 page from each board that's not burdensome.
So,
Great.
Anticipated. So it was totally anticipated that any board and committee would be able to give feedback to the select board. The question was whether it was going to be at, whether it was going to be looking at all 8 or whether there was going to be this whittling down. And that's actually what we haven't decided. That has gone, but it seems like everyone at least is going towards the same direction, is that planning board needs to get in there along with other boards and committees. The whole reason for this is for efficiency. No one wants to put something in front of the special permit granting authority if it's dead on arrival. That's the whole point, I believe, of what Maureen is talking about.
Yes.
Right. So, and I think everyone agrees that no one wants a dead on arrival submission. We're all in agreement there. It's a question of how do, who, it seems like we have definitely made the decision that the select board is going to be, they are going to be the actual evaluators scoring these proposals with input from boards and committees, especially the planning board. So that's what I'm hearing. So maybe there might be a staff recommendation, but staff's not scoring. This is what I'm hearing. Please jump in if anyone.
Brian, I'm going to just ask you a quick question. So the chart that you showed me about the highly advantage and not advantage, you showed everyone just now, there is an advantage. It's giving them points for not complying with the design guidelines. From the planning board's perspective, we don't approve projects unless they abide by the design guidelines. It's not a half fee. You kind of sort of do it. It's either you meet the law or you don't meet the law. So I would rather just see that advantageous +1, just delete it. You either meet it or you don't, and get the wishy-washy out of it in terms of that. And that helps just reinforce that you got to meet the zoning. If we're looking into 40Bs, that's a different animal that doesn't have to do with any of our zoning. But if that's the goal, then there's no halfy that would give you points. It's either you do it or you don't, and go from there. And so that's where I see that there's gray area that can cause some problems for.
I think to be honest, I think that 1 point accounts for the gray area, meaning that there's probably some things that they might be good at, they comply, but there's other things that maybe they don't, or let's say that they do it, but they don't do it enough.
So then are you saying that the planning board after it would come in and then help support them, get them there? Get them to the place where they meet it? Okay, so that should be a little bit more clear then.
Because these are the criteria that will then get you, the 3 or 4 developers, and then, you can have the greater conversations before selecting one about how to get their project to an even, better degree in order to be able to go through the whole actual zoning and permitting.
I want to chime in real quick because I got the list of things and my brain can't keep them all in. One of the things that we always talk about on the planning board is pulling in people and talking to them so that we can help them move towards compliance with the zoning. So that's one point. The other point is that at the outset, this whole process was to try to get people to think out of the box in terms of what could possibly go there. And I fear that if we limit things too much in the RFP, we're going to drive away some of that out of the box thinking, when we know that eventually when we get down to those 3 selectees, that we will be working with them in order to bring them into complete compliance with the zoning. So we know we're going to be working with them. So why are we going to, at the front end, limit the designs or limit the imagination of people when we know we're going to be helping them funnel in? So I'm a little concerned about putting restrictions at the front end. I also wanted to say that one of the concerns was that they might not understand how do we integrate the design criteria into this document. We already have one of the appendices is the zoning bylaw, which talks about design criteria. We could also put in an appendix the entire of the actual design criteria that Dennis Carlone came up independently of the zoning bylaw, or I should say in conjunction with it. So that document could be in there. And last thing on my list is that I have actually found the developers of the CBD, the 2 CBD projects that are going on right now. I have found them to be very responsive to the planning board's concerns. So I don't have the same view of that process perhaps as Maureen has. So I don't consider them difficult developers. So I think there's a nuance in there in terms of how we deal with developers. But I'm really concerned that we're going to be putting in too much into the RFQ and we're going to be limiting what we're going to get out at the back end.
Yeah, I think that's the concern, Diab, and I agree from what I've seen with the developers on Main Street and Converse Place. I mean, they've been, working with Dennis Carlone. There's been a lot of response and a lot of changes. I don't, and I think that to the level that they've been adjusting based on what the town has been asking, I mean, it's significant. I mean, I don't see that other places, and maybe I'm not involved in as many projects, but we used the Right Lock Farm process as a general guideline for what works. I don't want to just be tethered to the Winning Farm project that was a disaster, 20 plus years ago. I think we've been moving towards something that developers can respond to, and the town can work with them to tweak if we find something that works within our framework. Is their score going to be 100? We don't expect it. We expect that it's going to be, we're going to find the right developer that is willing to work with us, and that means work with the planning board. I mean, work within your recommendations as well. So we realize your expertise is invaluable to us, and we just want to make sure that that's applied. So
I don't think it's anybody's intention to discourage applicants. I think it's simply to make sure, that they appreciate this process and that, all applicable bylaws and regulations and design guidelines apply. And I think what's been suggested is fairly reasonable. It's not rewriting this. It's just, adding and clarifying in a couple locations, and then we kind of see where hopefully this takes us in great places. But this is as everyone on this call is aware, this is a signature site in town, and it's right across the street from the common. Everyone will see it multiple times a day. It's obviously important to the town, and the process, so far has yielded, as has been noted, good interest. And we just want to, I think the idea is just balancing this, but I think there's a concern on behalf of the planning board and some on behalf of the select board as well, that we just want to make sure that there's some notation or mention in the P as a reminder about the process. Or maybe not, maybe you wouldn't call it a reminder, but just what's applicable.
Right. I'm going to jump in. I'll just keep saying it's not a discouraging thing for any developer. In fact, it's been said many times to us by all sorts of people, including developers, including planners and so on. The clearer your document is, the clearer your process is, or Dennis would say this too, they just want to know what you want. So clarifying is not a negative, and it's not. So I want to make that plea. And the first thing to clarify is to make sure that it's clear, spell out where the planning board comes in and where your other advisory boards, specifically design review and historical commission, when they come into this process and what we expect of them. So everybody knows where we're going. Is what in my career, in my work, I love outlines. This is an outline for how we're going to get there. And right now it's real fuzzy. And I think some clarification is in everybody's interest.
All right, I think that's your point is very well taken, and I'll work with Barry in order to have that more clearly. I really liked what you said, just to have another joint meeting following the submissions where all of you can give your input as to what recommendations would be with the different proposals, as well as the design and the historic commissions.
Brian,
But we'll get more clear.
Brian, I was going to ask you, so in this process, how it's currently laid out, I mean, we know that the pre-application meetings are really important. And in some ways, some of this is actually pre-application components of it. Where would you see us being the most supportive of the process being brought into this, not as the deciding party, but to help those the development teams come in so we can figure out exactly where to help them get pushed where we need them to go, or support them. I'm unclear on where that actually is from the planning board spot, and how that would look. Do you have any insight?
Yeah, so I mean, at least what was anticipated was the RFP is open till August 31st. And then the idea was then in September, there would be 2 to 3 meetings. One would be open to the public for everyone, for anybody, whether it's boards, committees, or anyone, just a total actual public meeting. Then the second meeting could be what we are talking about with the select board, but you're talking about how the planning board could potentially interact with the developers. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. I'm asking you to tell us what you see in the process so we can help make the process as successful as possible. Where would that be?
So,
or what would need to be changed to make that happen? Instead of doing it after they're selected, someone's selected down the road, and then we're coming in and they're not as flexible, or they're, how can we make it so we can get to where we are with other properties in the CBD that we currently have? How can we do that?
It's certainly, I mean, really then, I mean, what this is not picking a project, and then it's, picking a developer, and then we would be working with them. So in terms of where it would be, I mean, an RFP process is there you have you have evaluation criteria. Whoever has, with not necessarily the highest score, but certainly within the top 3, that developer would be chosen. The question really that we need to talk about is, are we trying to go towards a project, or are we trying to go towards a developer? I believe we're trying to go towards a developer, and then the work that you're talking about would happen in, it would certainly happen before they apply, but I think it would be around that time. Meaning somewhere in the September range, there will be, like I said, one public meeting, and then a meeting between both boards. You would give your comment. It's a question of what do we need to do to put into this RFP to make it, I don't know, so they're not married to their project. Is that kind of what you want?
No, I just want it laid out, the steps of how it is and where we fit into that to get this to where it needs to be.
Okay, well, so
this is Heather. I wonder if the timeline just needs to be cleared up in the RFP. Like on page 4, there's a couple dates, but it doesn't have more of the process, which sounds like what Maureen was asking for, so that people understand a little more of the timeline. Right, because that's sort of just some dates. It doesn't talk about input from other boards or what would happen next.
So we can definitely add there, after the RFP responses are due, we'll have, it's hard to say a specific date, but we can say September, public meeting, because when we did the RFQ, Lisa had a public meeting just so that folks were familiar with the proposals that were received. So we can repeat that and then say that also in September we'll have planning board and select board meetings for input, as well as receive input from the historic commission, design review commission, and I mean, I'm sure there will be other boards and committees and commissions that step in, but we can try to be as clear as possible because that will happen once responses are due and for the top proposal is chosen.
So Francis, you broke up a bit there, but I think what we're trying to basically say is in that September timeframe, there would be we would outline one you know I don't know what to call it, whether it's another joint meeting between the planning board and the select board.
Yes, yes.
But we could say that.
The public meeting
Yes.
isn't either.
Yes, we'll start with the public meeting, I think, because that's how we did it last time. Then we'll have basically a meeting like this one. And then we'll have any other plannings and committees that want to come up.
Right. So we can just call that out in September and say that specifically Planning Board, Historical Commission, as well as other boards and committees, because the Disability Access Commission might want to weigh in, as well as other boards and committees. If we call those out in the September meeting with still, it's basically all feedback to the select board, and then the select board would be the one scoring. Could we work with that framework, everybody?
Well, I want to make sure the public meeting is separate from the one that's.
100%.
Yeah.
100. It would definitely. I think we were thinking when the last one when we talked, we were talking about potentially 2 public meetings, and now this would be a joint meeting. But maybe instead it's just 1 joint meeting and 1 public meeting.
Correct.
Well, then I think that seems very reasonable for in the month of September, is to have 1 public meeting that's open to everybody. The select board would be running that meeting, taking comments. We would also probably have written comments up into a certain point. So in order to really elicit feedback from the community, and then there would, which would potentially include written feedback by the Design Review and Historical Commission at one of their own meetings.
Right.
That could be put into the public meeting. And then a second meeting is a joint meeting of the planning board's take on it. Again, the staff will not be actually scoring it. They will be evaluating the criteria and giving their opinion. That maybe doesn't need to necessarily be all flushed out now. We can just say staff will be evaluating and making recommendations, but not actually scoring the proposals. Seems like gets to everyone's point.
Can I add some meetings after the winnowing? I think that after the select board has winnowed it down to however many, that those candidates should then actually make presentations to the boards.
Correct. So that would be part of the interview process.
Okay.
So we would have these 2 meetings that we're just talking about right now, sometime in September, and then the interview process would have to be very quick in October, leading up to November town meeting. It's kind of an issue if we're going to be going into an interview process towards late October, because we need to try to work out a land transaction for fall town meeting. So this is going to be tighter than usual, and I mean, there could be some issues. I'm not going to say that, oh yeah, we can just do this. But the idea of having, I mean, it'll be a condensed process. It'll have to be, now that I'm thinking about this, the idea of going into October seems scary.
Brian, how could we actually do that anyways? Because some of the land is being used by the MBTA for their construction. I don't know if we need to rush into October when components of that lot need to be held off on being developed anyways, until the MBTA gets that portion of the train done.
Well, I don't know exactly what is going to happen at town meeting. There potentially was going to be some type of land transfer. I mean, the goal of this whole thing was a land transfer at fall town meeting. If that's changing, then we need to talk about that immediately.
The developers are very aware of the MBTA project and the schedule there too. So this isn't something that if their bid is accepted and we go to town meeting to approve the land transfer, that they're aware that there's going to be a little bit of lead time and some conflict in that area. I mean, they're well aware.
Yeah, I know that even during the walkthroughs that Brian and I did with them, they are well aware of the lead time. I'm just saying, I don't know if we need to rush it into October, if it's going to be really tight to get everything needed to meet town meeting requirements versus just going into the spring if they know they're selected and that's the goal and how we're moving forward with it.
It's not rushing in the sense that we went through the RFQ process and we took the time to identify the right developers. So they're waiting because their job is to build stuff, and they've hung in with us for a very long process already. And so I think awarding the land and the project to them gives them an idea that we're actually serious about it. It always makes developers feel a little bit uneasy, and they lose their focus on our town if we say, oh, you know what, we're going to kick this out to Springtown meeting. I mean, frankly, if they were my client, I'd be like, the town's not serious, just move on to something else.
I think
so I think the more prescriptive we are with the number of meetings and everything in the document, the less flexibility we leave ourselves to see how the process is coming in the fall, right? So clearly we don't know right now exactly when the dates of different things are going to be. So I would say let's leave dates of meetings off the RFP, because then we can work on it as the process moves forward.
I was just suggesting months, like a general timeline, even if it says fall, so people understand like the full range of meetings that would happen.
Yeah, I think it's fine to say meetings with various select boards and public meetings and meetings with boards and commissions in September. And I think it's still, like Michael said, I think it's both good faith showing if we can get to town meeting this fall. But again, I think that it's a good deadline to work towards. The more you push deadlines, just the longer the process is. But of course, if it's absolutely not possible, it'll be okay to then move it a little further out to Springtown meeting. But I think working towards the fall would be good.
Can I ask the select board if they had, are you planning on presenting multiple proposals to town meeting or a single one? I'm trying to recall what happened with Right Lock Farm, and although I was actually on one of the bidders for the property, I can't recall exactly what happened at town meeting. I know that a number of development groups made proposals at town meeting, but I can't recall if town meeting selected from that menu or whether the select board winnowed it down and then presented a single one.
We presented a single one. Diab, it may be a little bit fuzzy because one of the developers was also a resident and kind of showed up on his own after our recommendation to try to sell his projects. But as far as the warrant article and what was before town meeting, it was what had been recommended and down to a single recommendation. So that was my recollection of it as well. So we moved forward the Right Lock Conservancy's proposal after the process.
No, I'm talking about the original one, when we had 4 or 5 different developers, and I was part of the Trust for Public Land. So this is way in the back when we had Taurus and Abbott Engler and a whole bunch of them. I know that there were multiple presentations made to town meeting from each of the developers, because I actually was part of one of that. I made one of those presentations. So I know there was a lot more interaction with town meeting way in the beginning on that. That's like 20 years ago now, or however long ago it was.
Yeah, I think that we developed this process out of that one, being difficult. Frankly, I mean,
that's a kind way of putting it.
But maybe that's
doing my
the bigger
best.
point, that when the projects are difficult, it's because we're building. When we're preserving land, that's just a whole different animal. So it's what we're talking about now is going to be pretty. It's going to be challenging politically.
Well, all the Right Lock Farm proposals were development projects as well. I mean, so it was only one we received that was preservation, and we have none of the RFQs, none of the respondents to it were preservation.
So I did want to jump in at this meeting and say that without a doubt, the largest question in any development project is height. And this has left it wide open. And that's been again, we've got the very recent experience of 2 projects in the CBD. And I realize it does say scale, but already at the one public hearing that Deb and I attended, there was this floating around of 60 feet. So I do think that that's something we ought to be aware of, that didn't fly with our other 2 parcels.
Well, I think it's up to the developers to make an argument if they want height. And you know, if they can't come up with the design that works, then we just tell them it won't work. I mean, I think all the developers are very aware of what's going on with the Converse Place project. It's so they know that there are certainly elements, or I should say, you know, people in town who are concerned about height, and they understand what's going on. So if they come up with something that is tall, then they really have to show us why that's advantageous. It's their risk.
Yeah, and I think that as we were saying before, we don't want to be as we've already laid the evaluation criteria to award more points the more you developers respond to both the design and affordability guidelines. You know, affordability has the largest weight, the heaviest weight, but after that, there's more than 4, I think 5 different evaluation points that have to do with design, and those are almost as heavily weighted. So I think that I would really recommend against being more prescriptive than that at this time, because this is, you know, you're already narrowing down not just what developers can show you, but also the affordability. Affordability, it's really tough financially to make projects work the more restrictions you place on them, especially this early on. So I would really advise against furthering the design guidelines right now, in addition to everything we've already laid out.
Brian, do you put something in your weekly update about the number of points for design versus affordability? Do you recall those numbers?
Yeah, so the you get a 4x multiplier for affordable housing. So I think everything is worth 3 points. So the most amount of points you can get for getting for affordable housing, I believe, is 12 points. But with all the other points that are available related to design, I believe it ends up instead of 4x, it ends up becoming 14x. Let me see if I can find that. It was a slide. It was actually not in the RFP, Barry. I think it was actually in the slides. Let me see if I can find that real quick. Okay.
Yeah,
Just give me a second.
After Brian, he did the analysis of how many points are available for design versus affordability. It almost seems like we're not weighting affordability enough on this one.
Well, that's what they do, so I'm not worried about that.
Well, I am worried in the sense that we could end up choosing one which has lots of design criteria, but isn't really pushing the affordability, just because the number of points for affordability is much lower in total. One of the problems.
Yeah, I think over 14 points total. You could say from design. Again, affordability is the top, and Maureen, you are right. I mean, 7 out of 8 of these developers are affordable housing developers. So I think because we did a really great RFQ process, we've already selected, you know, the folks that we would like to have there, and they do specialize in affordable housing. But I think that as it is right now, and this has been through numerous iterations, because there were folks that were very concerned about affordability and other folks that were very concerned about design, as you know, as is of course very understandable and needed, and that's why we wanted to have different people weigh in through the RFP process. But I think right now, because we have the developers that we do, and because we're awarding the different points, I think I'd like to cautiously say it's a good balance right now between the affordability and design.
So one other thing I wanted to, it's sort of in there, but I did want to raise, because it's not a small point. Actually, even this morning before we began our formal meeting, you were mentioning La Patisserie. The small retail and small businesses do use some of that parking. And I think it does say something about parking proposal, sufficient parking for building residents, and addresses the loss of public parking. That's number 5. I don't know. It's in there, but at the end of the day, we really are going to have to figure out what amount of parking we want in this project.
I think it's
Right, but I don't think it's time. Again, like I said before, it's difficult to be prescriptive, especially when we are not ourselves developers trying to crunch numbers and find out everything else that comes into development. I just don't think now is the right time.
I'm going to interrupt Heather. I mean, not Heather, Francis, but I understand that. But it's not being prescriptive if this, the town of Winchester, that fuzzy town, the planning board and the select board for starters, are concerned about the retail. The retail was represented with the reconstruction of the MBTA, but that even is short term. But we hear from the chamber, we hear from representatives of those particular retail businesses about how fragile they are, and they do need some parking. So it's not prescriptive if we have some idea of what they need and what's available on the street. There are ratios, and we know what they've already got. And if it disappears, I think we're all going to be pretty unhappy. So to me, this should be, I mean, we can figure it out now. I don't think there's any mystery, and no developer is going to be telling us. We're going to have to be understanding what we need to support our little local retail.
I agree, and I think that having more folks that are living in the center of town has proved that actually really helps detail, because you have more people that are shopping around locally without the need of a car. But again, we have the parking as an evaluation criteria, and as folks go through it, we'll get more into the detail of what that means, how many spaces are public. And with the MBTA right now, those spaces are already being taken away for about 2 years, and that will not just give us a better sense of what that does to the different shops in town, but also give folks in town 2 years to think about where else they park in order to shop locally. So it's the project itself won't be disrupting the parking patterns as much as the MBTA project will. And once the project is done, it's actually going to be adding numerous households that can shop locally.
So I'm going to jump in real quick on a broader level between the select board and the planning board to have a discussion of, we are seeing, the planning board is seeing issues on the developments that we're trying to get through for the center business district in terms of parking. It is coming up consistently in everything that we are reviewing. And I think on a more broader scale, as this is really kind of taking the blinders and just focusing on one lot, as the center business district as a whole, as a group, we really have to address what is going on with the parking, because we are about to flood the CBD with more housing and less parking, which works in some situations, but it doesn't in others. And then on top of it is the impact to the street parking and the sidewalks, and then you go into the accessibility of the sidewalks. And overall, we're kind of keep pinpointing everything instead of looking at it as a full area of town and coming up together with, as you guys as the responsible for the streets and sidewalks, and as for the permitting of the construction of the private land, we got to come up with something. It's not, it keeps happening and it's just not being addressed. And what I'm concerned about with this is what some town meeting members have mentioned about the Waterfield lot is, if you take that parking away, I'm not voting for it. And I was like, why? Because we need that parking. We need that parking. I get that we can sit and watch and see. But if you're talking about doing the land transfer in October, we actually have to have a plan for parking in the center business district. The businesses need to know what the plan is. All the private developers who are trying to develop their private lands outside of this lot need to know. The planning board needs to know. So I'm actually hoping that the two, like, we can figure out a solution of how to work through this and come up with a plan, whatever that may be, to be very clear, to explain what the plan is in parking, what the plan is with all the cars, what are we doing in the floodplains, and come up with that, because it's constantly coming up at us and we haven't solved it, and we don't have enough information from the select board on what that plan is. But that is probably for a different meeting. But it does highlight in this that there is a concern, and it constantly keeps coming up to us. And I'm not sure that the RFP, we can leave it flexible, but I think it might, there may be some people coming in at town meeting questioning the parking, and how are we going to do that? How are we going to support these businesses when we're already packed? And now if we are looking also at, further closing down streets outside of COVID, considering doing that as well, that also has impact. So just select board, if you guys have any feedback or thoughts on that, or how to approach that going forward, that'd be helpful for us to know what we can do and how we can work together to just take that on.
I just wanted to jump in real quick and say, Heather, thank you so much for raising that. And obviously that maybe for another meeting, but I would also note in one of those projects, just as a specific example, in case my colleagues on the select board may or may not be aware, that one project appears, if I'm interpreting it correctly, to rely on using a parking elevator. And so, for example, I don't know that there's requirements with our town one way or the other on that, or whether or not, for example, there needs to be some requirement that those be attended, that a condo association have an attendant to use such a structure. So it's a small example, but I'm so glad that you raised that, Heather, and but understanding that that's not necessarily something we'll solve it in this meeting. Thanks.
I was going to just jump in super quick. The idea of parking, first of all, the reason why we're here, meaning after an RFQ and now this RFP, a lot of that has to do with the, pulling that ripcord on what to do with the parking, meaning that we have been pushing that answer down the line for about 5 years at least. And what the point of this process was to look, we are not going to figure out this parking problem. We've tried to at least figure it out downtown. It doesn't look like there's structured parking that it can be accommodated downtown. After the study that we looked at from Walker Consulting, they're basically like, go build a parking structure at Wedgemere. So the idea was that we would go through this process and see what the developers come up with. If it doesn't jive or if it doesn't work for a town, we will certainly know that. I guarantee you, if at the select board meeting, whether it's the joint meeting with the planning board or others, if everyone is coming from the chamber and just basically everywhere around saying that we don't want to lose this parking, I have a sneaking suspicion select board will not try to jam this down town meeting throat if everyone at town meeting and around is saying we don't want this at all. So the idea was we don't have the answer. Let's see what they come up with and see if this shakes out.
Well, I understand that approach, Brian, but I think that one of the problems is that we are now putting undue responsibility on developers of individual projects, as Heather pointed out, to solve a problem which is really much larger than their particular plot of land. And we've had multiple people, or we've had, people buying up empty, gas stations to put parking on. We have a fundamental problem across all of the CBD for parking. And just saying that each individual developer has to now solve that problem, it's a fragmented approach, and it's not fair to the developers. We have to clean up our mess. So I understand where you're coming from, but I just don't see how they're going to be able to help if we don't have a blueprint.
I mean, the way that they would help is they're saying they're going to provide X amount of parking for their residents and they're going to keep X amount of parking public, or they're going to keep zero public. I mean, they're going to come up with something. If the answer is that we want 25 spaces of public parking and that's, that's what we need, or
But we don't know that we need 25
that
spaces.
that's kind of the point, is that we've gone through what we can go through in terms of exercise, in terms of what we want. The idea is that there are many competing interests for that lot in terms of.
I understand, but
Right.
but unless the town has to say, how does the town say we need 25 spaces? We've had, as you pointed out, we had a number of design proposals for structured parking around downtown, and we still don't know how much we need. So asking a developer to say, hey, here's 25 spaces, how do we know that's the right amount? So I'm concerned that the developer will say something and we will have no way of evaluating whether that is a realistic proposal, because we have no criteria to determine whether it's realistic.
Hi, this is different, but have you all ever, I thought you had a parking and traffic plan for downtown. If you don't, I would strongly consider doing one, because it's true what Dia was saying. It's not a development by development thing. It's the town figuring out what the need is and making a plan and implementing it that responds to that.
So we do have a downtown management plan. Just like many plans that, again, there's competing interests. Some people think it's working fine, others think it's working horribly.
But do we have any objective criteria to determine whether it's working? Have we gone out and determined, I don't know how you do that. I'm not a traffic engineer, but I know that
we have Diab. I mean, just we've been evaluating this, and the engineering department has been kind of going out to the different lots on a regular basis to see which are full, which are empty. There's the idea that there's never enough parking in the town center for people that want to drive up, in front of the salon and have a parking space waiting for them. We're never going to be a mall, so it's a give and take. And the select board did do a pretty broad parking study a few years ago, where we evaluated and identified specific lots, as you know, for parking garages. And it was not, there was no way for us to move forward with that. So I think, we're going to lose parking at this lot. And I mean, it's just a conversation for all of us to have of, does that balance our other needs, and how do we manage other parking for residents that doesn't scare them away from the center business district. I mean, we by design said that we want more residential units in the town center to increase foot traffic and to make it more active. I think we've gotten to the point where we're just slaves to this idea that parking is the only thing that brings people to our businesses, and it's really not. It's not accurate. I mean, there's some sort of, and I know that's not what you're saying. I'm just saying it is part of a larger discussion, and it is unfair to make the developers solve that problem as part of this, even if it exacerbates that problem.
Right. So if you already have you've had people go out and actually get quantitative measurements, is there some sort of an interim report so that we could actually look and see what the capacity is and what the use capacity is? I mean, we're talking about this and we have no data.
So yeah, and I think some of that is informed when we did the kind of broader parking study a few years back with the chamber, and we adjusted the parking to 2 hour, and we put the parking meters in and things like that. So it's
but we don't. But you've made the changes. Now we have to measure and see whether they have done anything. And without that sort of measurement, I don't think that we could convince town meeting or anyone that we know what's going on. So I understand where you're coming from, but we need to have some hard data so that we can quantify what's happening, and then we can show to town meeting that the parking is adequate or the parking isn't adequate. And that's where we have, it's hard to say we need more parking if we can't show that we need more parking.
Fair enough.
It also will help us too. If we need to adjust the zoning for parking, we will have a better idea of how to do that. I think right now, the parking study was prior to a lot of the housing that we see coming in through the CBD. So if we can look at what the anticipated housing that we are about to get into the center business district, and then incorporate all that and see if we need to make changes into the zoning requirements for parking, that'll give us information. It's just coordinating the two boards together to figure out that information so we know what we need to do on our side and how we can talk about it with residents too, because usually we're like, well, you need to go to the select board on that because and we don't know. And maybe it's just updating the data and figuring it out from there. Sorry to take so much conversation out of traffic, especially right now with it not being parking as an issue. The other side of parking too that isn't being discussed right now, I don't want to discuss it, but I just want it on the select board's radar, is also the deliveries. So these big units have deliveries coming in and out. The additional retail will have additional deliveries coming in and out. And then you will also have the trash disposal coming in and out of these buildings. All that clogs up the parking issues as well. So just something to keep in your head when we go through this. I'm going to move on. You said, so we're talking about doing the land transfer in October at town meeting, which is 4 months. I don't see how a packet could be put together to go before town meeting for them, a packet that's strong enough for them to go for a land transfer. Just from an architecture's point of view of how long it takes to put those things together, to put together that packet, to then give them the authority of the select board. So that's, I just wanted to bring that up as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're gonna, move forward, towards November town meeting as much as we can. I mean, it's, I, we've been as part of the RFP process, and we've really been discussing all these things, and we realize that there are risks and there are limitations, and we want to propose the best development to town meeting when we can get there. But when you just pile up all of the issues with the proposal, we just get to a point of paralysis, and we need to move forward with something. I mean, it exists the way that it is, and it's underperforming because it is a difficult lot, and it's a waste for the town to have that location just be surface parking for some people. So I think that's what we'll wait. I think we certainly will spend a lot of time over the next several months on parking implementation and evaluating what it's, we'll have to look back at some of our prior numbers, because right now, obviously, parking use, it looks different than it normally would. But yeah, I mean, I think we're going to factor in all that. And if we select a developer and they can't move forward to fall town meeting and say, let's wait either for a special town meeting or for the town meeting in the spring, well, that's up to them. We just don't want to get in the way of it.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. So I think that we're kind of closing here around 10. Brian, I don't know if you want to follow up with the planning board and town hall staff and see where to go from here. We envision kind of moving forward with the RFP.
Yeah, so I mean, we had anticipated that we would be advertising and moving forward. We ended up having to go a week later so that this would actually be up and out on July 1st, a little over a week from now. So that's the earliest date that we can start accepting it, based upon putting it on the central register. So we would put it in the central register this Wednesday, I believe, and then it would go in the following Thursday, I believe. So that, or whatever July 1st is. But that, as of now, that is the earliest date that it's going to get released, and that's the date we are moving towards. If otherwise, that would be the last question, I guess, for the select board. I don't believe a vote needs to be taken, but we are moving forward with a July 1st release date. With obviously with the edits that we talked about today.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Yeah.
What?
Oh yeah,
what
we're
are
just
we
gonna let's just disregard this whole.
No, well, we understand that parking. It's been a while since we did a parking study. I'm sure there's some data collection going on that Brian's doing or somebody's doing or Beth. But yes, we do need to revisit that, but not right now, because I think we understand that this is a parcel of land that contains parking, and so parking is part of the whole design process for whatever's what we're talking about with this RFP. So
we can certainly have more answers prior to the question and answer period for developers. So they're probably going to come up with these questions, the same questions that we're coming up, because it as members of both boards are saying, is there's some gray areas there related to parking in terms of what we actually want. So hopefully before that question and answer, we could have maybe whether it's discussions between chairs or we can do something there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask. I just have to sign off. So I just want to say thank you for everyone for coming together. I have to get going. I'm so sorry. My emergency
Thanks, Heather.
to call. So I think everyone's on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I just wanted
Thanks,
to
Heather.
Brian, when you're mentioning, are you envisioning after this meeting sort of circulate another draft? I just want to make sure that the planning board's kind of concerns.
Yeah, I don't. I think that's a tight time frame. I don't know if because this has to. I believe it's Wednesday. I believe so. The goal here that I was going to at some point today or tomorrow touch base with Barry, and we were going to put all these very few edits that everyone really obviously agrees on, and it totally makes sense, and everyone's on board. So we would just get that out, and then. I did not anticipate that there would be another round.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that this discussion is manifested in whatever the current version is. I think
definitely imperative. Yep.
I think the planning board has made important comments along those lines. So if it's something that you're sort of editing during this meeting or can just circulate by the end of the day or something, I think that would be respectful to the many comments that have been made.
And Brian, if you could just loop Jackie in directly on that for the board. I mean, it's really her expertise that will benefit us. I mean, I feel confident where we are, but I don't have the planning background that Jackie does, and so I think it makes sense. I mean, I just know that I don't want it to look like Boston City Hall with the world headquarters for Hooters at the ground level. That's about all I know. So, but I think having some more expertise than that is helpful for the select board.
Yeah, that's a good base, but yeah.
It's a pretty low bar. Yeah.
And I'm happy to look it over. I just want to make sure that those from the planning board also have that opportunity, and then kind of circle back with you maybe tomorrow or something, assuming everything will be consistent with this discussion, but just to have that opportunity. Thank you.
Yep, sounds good.
So we'll close up the select board. We have one quick vote to take on the Swanton Street proposal as well. Sorry, I forgot that one at the outset. But thank you, Barry and Francis and Brian, the planning board, everyone. Really appreciate it, and we'll just keep in touch and try to keep things moving along.
Yes, thank you everyone so much, and we'll definitely come through with more joint meetings. I think they're really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis.
Thanks a lot.
So I'll take a motion on
Barry.
the Swanton Street outdoor dining proposal, unless anybody has questions before everybody jumps off.
You mean Swanton Street Diner?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yep.
Just had a quick question. This is Amy on the location of the tables. Are they going to be on the side street or are they going to be right on Swanton?
My understanding is they're gonna be on the side street.
Okay.
Florence or something, Holland,
Okay.
something.
My only
I mean, on
concern
the
is that the bike path cut through, like that's how you would continue on the bike path, as far as I'm understanding. So I just would want to make sure that we're accounting for that. I mean, there's the crosswalk is right at that corner to cross Swanton. So I just want to make sure that that's not the bikers and walkers are not being sort of won't have to be diverted into the street. I don't know if we've seen a picture or and maybe I missed it.
We do have a sketch. I mean, it's actually on the sidewalk. It's not. It won't interfere. My understanding, anyways, is that it won't interfere with any of the bike path or anything at all. So.
Well, the
it
bike
looks
path,
like-
the sidewalk is the bike path there
Yeah.
in that area because it cuts through that neighborhood from the high school over to where it connects near Morocco.
Yeah, to get to the crosswalk across Swanton is off of the sidewalk
right
in
there.
front of Swanton Street Diner.
Right.
But okay. I mean, the sidewalk isn't the bike path, though. I mean, that
But
can't
no,
be.
well, yeah, no, it kind of is. Like if you go behind the sidewalk, behind the high school, and you connect to towards Morocco, it actually the bike path is through the neighborhood. It's not a dedicated bike path in that area. It's actually part of the. So Holland Street, you actually would cut through, and then you would take a cross Swanton, take a quick right, and then a quick left on Florence Street, and then that connects back to the sort of traditional bike path at Morocco. So that's my concern is that people walk and bike on Holland Street to get to that crosswalk at Swanton because that is actually the bike path in that area.
So I guess the question is, if you're riding your bike on the
Mhm.
street, not on the sidewalk, could you then hang a right to get up onto the sidewalk on the Swanton Street side of the diner in order to get into that crosswalk? And I think you can, but I'm not positive.
Still, though, there's no way that we would sanction or would direct anybody to be going on the sidewalk on their bike.
Okay. All right. So the
even
sidewalk
if
is
that's
really
what
for
people do,
pedestrians.
yeah,
All
even
right,
if that's
all
what
right.
people do, we can't.
It's not allowed by law.
That's not allowed. Yeah.
Right. No, I guess I was more concerned about getting to that crosswalk. Because it's a busy street. People go fairly fast and there's a lot of kids on bikes that cross at that crosswalk. So that's all I'm saying. I just want to make sure that there's enough space for them to navigate that corner. I'm not opposed to it. I just want to make sure that there's enough space.
Yeah, we're not blocking any crosswalks or kind of connections that way at all. And I think staff has weighed in on that as well.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Amy, it's a good point though, because I'm assuming they would be taking the sidewalk and therefore there would be space on the street that might otherwise be for bikes. So it's good you raised it.
Yeah, it's pretty clear. You can get, it's not a big problem to get from Holland Street to the crosswalk.
Okay.
Okay, so I move that we approve the application for outdoor dining for the Swanton Street Diner as presented.
Second,
All in favor? I'll take a roll call vote. Jackie,
yes.
Susan,
Yes.
Amy,
Yes.
and yes for me. The motion carries unanimously, 4-0. Are there any other questions or any agenda items that the board wants to see coming up, or anything else that we missed?
Thank you for organizing today's meeting, by the way.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie, for the idea. I think it was really, really helpful.
Yeah, there's no other way to do this, so that's
No.
good. It's good.
Big-
It's good to
big
all
stuff.
be on the same page.
So I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
All in favor? Jackie,
yes.
Susan,
Yes.
Amy,
Yes.
and yes for me. The motion carries unanimously, 4-0. Thank you again for getting together for another meeting in our supposedly this was our week off. But it's good to hear everyone's voices and see you, and we'll talk soon.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mike.
Hi,
Thanks.
Yep,
Thanks,
good
everybody.
meeting, everyone. Talk
Thanks.
to everyone. Have a good week,
Thank,
everybody.
thank you, Brian. Thanks.